For most English-speaking viewers, the North Caucasus appears only as a handful of disconnected images. Perhaps you know Khabib Nurmagomedov, the undefeated UFC champion from Dagestan, or Ramzan Kadyrov, the ruler of Chechnya, usually seen surrounded by armed men and declaring his loyalty to Vladimir Putin. You may remember the Beslan school siege, one of the most horrific terrorist attacks in modern Russian history, or the Boston Marathon bombing carried out by two brothers from a Chechen family. But these are not separate stories. They are fragments of one of the most important parts of the Russian puzzle. The North Caucasus is a narrow, mountainous region on Russia's southern edge, inhabited by dozens of peoples with their own languages, religions, clan structures, and memories of conquest. Moscow calls it an ordinary part of the Russian Federation. In reality, Russia has never ruled it in quite the same way it rules the rest of the country. It has depended on military force, local strongmen, federal money, fear, and a carefully maintained appearance of stability. And the geography makes this region impossible to dismiss. The Caucasus connects Russia to the Black Sea, the Caspian Sea, Turkey, Iran, Central Asia, and the Middle East. It has shaped Russian military power, ethnic tensions, internal politics, and one of the Kremlin's oldest fears, that if one part of the empire begins to pull away, another may follow. I'm Elvira Bary, a writer born in the Soviet Union. Today I want to give you one of the missing keys to understanding Russia, because once the Caucasus is placed back into the picture, many other pieces suddenly make sense. Moscow's obsession with territorial control, its terror of separatism, its dependence on violence, and the possibility that a future Russian crisis may begin not in Moscow, but here. Here's our roadmap, the Mountain Crossroads, how geography created one of Eurasia's most diverse and difficult-to-rule regions. The Conquest, how and why the Russian Empire took over the Caucasus. Memory on the stone, what Stalin left behind. The power of networks, how communities survive when institutions cannot be trusted. The Chechen Bargain, how Putin rules Chechnya through Kadyrov's clan. The Caucasian Mosaic, why the region's nations cannot be treated as one people. When Moscow weakens, what could break first? If you value this kind of independent analysis, please like, subscribe, and share. You can also join my think tank, support the channel through PayPal or Super Thanks, or use your high points to help this episode reach more people. And please follow the show on Spotify. It really helps, and the next episode will appear in your feed automatically. Thank you for being here. Let's begin with the land itself, the mountain crossroads that Russia conquered but never fully absorbed. The mountain crossroads. Before we ask why Russia fought for the Caucasus, we need to understand what kind of region this is. The Caucasus stands on one of the oldest crossroads in Eurasia. For thousands of years, merchants, armies, nomads, pilgrims, and empires moved between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, between the steppe to the north and the civilizations of Anatolia, Persia, and the Middle East to the south. Trade routes brought wealth through the region, but they also brought conquerors. Yet passing through the Caucasus was much easier than controlling it. The mountains divide the land into narrow valleys, deep gorges, forests, and isolated plateaus. Communities living only a short distance apart could remain separated for centuries. Languages developed independently. Customs, religious traditions, and systems of loyalty differed from one valley to the next. The Caucasus became one of the most linguistically and ethnically diverse places on Earth. There was no single Caucasian people and no unified Caucasian state. Most people identified first with their village, clan, valley, or local nation. Alliances shifted, feuds could last for generations, and political authority rarely extended far beyond the land that could actually be defended. Life in the mountains was also difficult. There was little industry, limited farmland, and few large cities. Most families survived through herding sheep, goats, cattle, and horses, cultivating small plots, making crafts, trading across the passes, or living temporarily to earn money elsewhere. In some areas, raiding, kidnapping, and the capture of slaves also became part of the local economy. These practices were not unique to the Caucasus, but poverty, weak central authority, and constant warfare allowed them to persist. This combination made the region strategically valuable and politically resistant. The Caucasus controlled the road south, but the people who lived there had every advantage when resisting an outside army. The conquest. Look at the map. The mountain chain stretches between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. Beyond it lie Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Turkey, and Iran. Whoever controls the passes can move armies, supplies, and trade across the region. Whoever does not control them can find territory south to the mountains cut off from the rest of the empire. This became urgent after Russia annexed the eastern Georgian kingdom of Kartli-Kakheti in 1801. Moscow now controlled territory beyond the mountains, but the road to it remained vulnerable. Small groups of fighters could attack convoys, disrupt supplies, and isolate Russian forces. To hold Georgia, Russia decided it had to control the North Caucasus as well. The main Caucasian War lasted from 1817 to 1864. It was not a single war against one united nation. Chechens, Dagestanis, Circassians, and smaller communities resisted at different times and for different reasons. Their division made cooperation difficult, but they also made the region hard to conquer. There was no capital to capture, and no single ruler whose surrender could end the war. Villages submitted and rebelled again. Local fighters knew the forests and passes, while Russian armies depended on long supply lines. Russia answered by changing the landscape. It built forts, military roads, and Cossack settlements, cleared forests, and destroyed or relocated villages suspected of supporting resistance. The war continued in the West until 1864. During the final campaigns, Russian forces destroyed Circassian villages and drove much of the population toward the Black Sea coast. Hundreds of thousands fled or were expelled into the Ottoman Empire, and many died from hunger, disease, overcrowding, or shipwreck. The conquest transformed the Western Caucasus. Large parts of the Circassian homeland, including areas around modern Sochi, were emptied and resettled. Today, more Circassians live in Turkey and the Middle East than in their ancestral territory. Russia had won, but conquest did not mean full control. Imperial officials still relied on loyal nobles, religious figures, and local leaders to govern communities they did not fully understand. This became Moscow's lasting method in the Caucasus. Crush resistance when necessary, then rule through local intermediaries whose power depends on the center. Memory on the stone. By the late 19th century, the Caucasus was no longer only a military frontier. Baku became a global oil center. Grozny developed into another major producer, and the northern plains supplied grain, livestock, fruit, and wine. Spa towns such as Pyatigorsk and Kislovodsk also became fashionable resorts for the imperial elite. The Soviet state expanded these industries, but prosperity offered no protection. During World War II, Stalin accused entire peoples of disloyalty and deported them collectively. The Karachais were removed in 1943. In February 1944, the Soviet state deported more than 500,000 Chechens and Ingush to Kazakhstan and Central Asia. The Balkars followed weeks later. Families were packed into freight cars, and thousands died from hunger, disease, cold, and poor living conditions. Their republics were abolished or redrawn. Villages were renamed, and homes and farmland were given to others. The official justification was collaboration with Nazi Germany, although German forces had never occupied most of Chechnya or Ingushetia. After Stalin's death, survivors were allowed to return, and the Chechen Ingush Republic was restored in 1957. But 13 years of dispossession could not be undone. Many returned to find other families living in their homes and other communities settled on their land. One lasting result was the dispute over the Prigorodny district. Ingush families saw it as territory stolen during the deportation. North Ossetians saw it as land where they had lived for decades. In 1992, the conflict turned violent, killing hundreds and displacing tens of thousands of Ingush. This is why local identity survived Soviet modernization so strongly. People remembered that citizenship, education, and loyalty to the state had not protected them when Moscow decided to punish an entire nation. The power of networks. When official institutions cannot be trusted, people learn to survive through personal connections. These networks already existed across the Soviet Union. Russians used friends and favors to find jobs, obtain scarce goods, or solve problems with officials, but they became especially important for people from the Caucasus who moved to large cities far from home. During the late Soviet period, migration from the Caucasus to Moscow, Leningrad, and other industrial centers increased. Some newcomers arrived as students, engineers, doctors, or factory workers. Others entered the growing informal economy, selling produce, repairing apartments, working in restaurants, or moving goods between regions where prices and supplies differed. A newcomer often depended on people from his village or extended family. One person might provide a place to sleep, another might find him work, and relatives might lend him money when a bank would not. These connections were particularly valuable for minorities who faced prejudice, police checks, and restrictions on housing or registration. After the Soviet Union collapsed, such networks became even more important. State institutions weakened. Contracts were difficult to enforce, and businesses often needed personal protection. A young man from Dagestan arriving in Moscow might be met by a relative, housed by someone from his village, and introduced to an employer through another contact. If the employer refused to pay, an older and more respected figure might intervene. These networks help people build businesses and protect themselves in a chaotic economy. Some were involved in crime, but many simply provided services that the state could not: credit, employment, housing, mediation, and security. They also preserved identity. A person might speak Russian at work, but return home to relatives, familiar food, religious traditions, and news from his native village. Weddings and funerals connected people across cities and republics, while reputation traveled quickly through the network. Many of these structures remain important today, although they have changed. Modern networks are rarely based only on blood or ancestry. A Dagestani circle may begin with relatives but expand through a mosque, a wrestling club, a university, a government office, or a shared business. Chechen society offers a similar example. Chechens traditionally belong to extended lineage groups known as tapes, which still influence marriage, family memory, and social relationships. But modern Chechnya is not simply a tribal society. Deportation, Soviet urbanization, two wars, mass migration, and Kadyrov's dictatorship transformed it. Political power today depends not only on family ties, but also on armed units, government positions, access to money, and personal loyalty to the ruler. The Chechen Bargain. After the Soviet Union collapsed, Chechnya declared independence. Boris Yeltsin's government refused to accept the loss of the territory and invaded in December 1994. The Kremlin expected a short operation, Instead, Russian forces entered Grozny and suffered devastating losses. The war exposed corruption, poor planning, and an army unprepared for urban combat. In 1996, Russia withdrew under the Khasavyurt Agreement. Chechnya became independent in practice, although its final legal status remained unresolved. Freedom did not bring stability. Many cities had been destroyed. The economy collapsed. Armed commanders controlled separate forces. Nationalist leaders competed with radical Islamists, some supported by foreign fighters and money. In 1999, militants led by Shamil Basayev and Ibn al-Hattab crossed from Chechnya into Dagestan. Apartment bombings inside Russia followed, although responsibility for those attacks remains disputed. Vladimir Putin used the crisis to launch the Second Chechen War. Russian forces again destroyed much of Grozny, but Moscow eventually understood that Russian soldiers could occupy territory but not control the society beneath it. So the Kremlin changed its method. Ahmad Kadyrov had served as the chief mufti of separatist Chechnya. During the Second War, he broke with the rebels and joined Moscow. He brought local authority, religious standing, and fighters who understood Chechen society from inside. This strategy became known as Chechenization. Local forces searched for insurgents, questioned families, and identified networks that Russian troops could not penetrate. Moscow supplied money, weapons, legal protection, and overwhelming military support. Ahmad Kadyrov became president of Chechnya in 2003. He was assassinated in a stadium bombing the following year. His son Ramzan inherited the system and became the republic's leader in 2007. The bargain with Moscow remained the same. Kadyrov would suppress separatism, destroy independent armed groups, and demonstrate absolute loyalty to Putin. Moscow would finance reconstruction and allow him extraordinary freedom inside Chechnya. Federal money rebuilt central Grozny with towers, mosques, broad avenues, and polished government buildings. The city that Russian forces had reduced to ruins became the regime's display window. But beneath the reconstruction stood a personalized state. Residents learned to apply directly to Kadyrov rather than rely on institutions. A report from Grozny described people sending complaints through Instagram. Sometimes Kadyrov appeared publicly, scolded an official, and ordered the problem fixed. This looked responsive. It also showed that the system depended on one man. Kadyrov developed armed formations personally loyal to him and the Kremlin. His forces later appeared in Syria and Ukraine. He presents himself as Putin's soldier while enjoying a degree of autonomy no ordinary Russian governor possesses. At the same time, Chechnya remains heavily dependent on federal transfers and political protection. Moscow pays because another war would cost far more. A Mosaic of Nations. The North Caucasus may look like one region on the map, but it is a collection of very different societies. Dagestan is the most diverse. Dozens of ethnic groups share one republic, and no single group can dominate without risking conflict with the others. Its politics has long depended on bargaining between regional, ethnic, religious, and business networks. Ingushetia is smaller and more cohesive. Their disputes over land can unite much of society at once. When the authorities transferred territory to Chechnya in 2018, large protests erupted because many Ingush saw the decision as another humiliation imposed from above. Other republics contain several major peoples within the same borders. In Kabardino-Balkaria and Karachayo-Cherkessia, arguments over land, political appointments, and history can quickly become ethnic disputes. North Ossetia is mostly Christian and traditionally closer to Moscow, but it has its own unresolved territorial conflict with Ingushetia. This is what makes the region so difficult to control. Each republic has a different ethnic balance, historical memory, religious structure, and relationship with Moscow. The North Caucasus is not one rebellion waiting to begin, it is a collection of unresolved conflicts that could ignite separately and then spread. When Moscow weakens, the North Caucasus is peaceful only as long as Moscow can keep performing three functions: provide money, suppress challengers, and prevent local disputes from turning into open conflict. That requires constant effort. Many of these republics have weak economies and depend heavily on federal support. At the same time, Moscow must manage ethnic rivalries, territorial disputes, religious tensions, resentment toward local rulers, and memories of early Russian violence. These pressures have not disappeared. They have merely been contained. Recent unrest in Dagestan demonstrated how quickly the surface can break. In 2022, mobilization triggered some of Russia's strongest public protests because many residents believed their communities were again being asked to pay an unfair price for Moscow's policies. The following year, an anti-Semitic mob was able to storm the airport in Makhachkala. In 2024, coordinated attacks on religious buildings and police killed 20 people. These were very different events, but each exposed limits in the authorities' ability to anticipate and control unrest. Chechnya presents a different danger. Moscow does not govern it through ordinary federal institutions. It governs through a personal bargain with Ramzan Kadyrov, whose power rests on his family, security forces, federal money, and his relationship with Putin. The arrangement brought outward stability, but it did not create a durable system that could easily survive either man. This is why the Caucasus would become especially vulnerable during a crisis in Moscow. If federal money shrinks, local elites will fight harder over what remains. If the Kremlin can no longer frighten everyone equally, all grievances will become politically useful again. Disputes over borders, land, ethnic representation, and religious authority may return because there is no trusted legal system capable of resolving them. Some republics might remain loyal to Russia. Others could demand greater autonomy. Local rulers might build their own armed power, while nationalists or Islamist groups present themselves as alternatives. Most ordinary people would not necessarily want another war, but they might organize around family, ethnicity, religion, or village simply because they no longer trusted the state to protect them. The North Caucasus is therefore a permanent headache for Moscow. Russia conquered the region, but it never created a common political identity strong enough to replace its local loyalties. Stability still depends on money, fear, and personal agreements. And those are precisely the things that disappear when central power begins to fail. This does not mean that the North Caucasus would automatically leave Russia first, but it is one of the places where a weakening Kremlin would lose control fastest, because beneath the appearance of order lie multiple societies, unresolved grievances, armed networks, and very different ideas about what should come next. Before you go, I'd like to ask you something personal. Is there a region in your own country where people feel more loyalty to their state, province, religion, ethnicity, or local community than to the national government? And if the central government suddenly became weaker, do you think those local loyalties would hold the country together or begin pulling it apart? If this video helped you see Russia differently, please like it, subscribe, and share it with someone who is curious about what may happen after Putin. Your support helps this channel go beyond daily headlines and explain the deeper structures underneath them. You can also join my think tank, leave us super thanks, support the channel through PayPal, or use your hype points to help this episode reach more viewers. And please follow the show on Spotify. It genuinely helps, and the next episode will appear in your feed automatically. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.